Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the last crocodile hybrid. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The morning always began with the cold. It was not the crisp, refreshing chill of a spring dawn, nor the brisk air of an autumn breeze. It was a deep, paralyzing cold that settled into the very marrow of his bones, turning his blood to sluggish molasses. It was a biological mandate, a stark reminder of what he was, written into the double helix of his DNA. Izuku Midoriya opened his eyes. The world was a blur of muted colors, his slit, amber-colored pupils taking a moment to contract against the faint light filtering through his bedroom curtains. He didn't move. He couldn't. Not yet. His body lay heavy against the mattress, a sprawling mass of rigid muscle and thick, armored skin. He waited for the click. Above his bed, rigged to a specialized timer Inko had purchased from a black market support gear vendor years ago, a row of high-intensity thermal heat lamps flickered to life. The dull hum of the bulbs was the soundtrack of his survival. Slowly, the searing, artificial sunlight bathed his skin. Izuku let out a long, rattling breath, a sound more akin to the hiss of steam escaping a cracked pipe than a human sigh. He lay there as the heat seeped through his dermal plating. His skin was not the soft, peach fuzz-covered flesh of a normal teenage boy. It was a mosaic of dark, swamp-green scales. Along his forearms, calves, and spanning the entirety of his broad back were thick, ridged osteoderms, bone deposits forming a natural armor so dense it could deflect small arms' fire. His hands ended in thick, webbing-laced fingers tipped with dark, obsidian-like claws. But the most imposing feature of his anatomy lay coiled heavily at the foot of his bed, his tail. It was nearly 6 feet long, thicker than a telephone pole at its base, and tapering to a muscular, heavily spiked point. It was a weapon of mass destruction, capable of snapping a concrete pillar in half with a casual twitch. Right now, it lay dormant, soaking in the infrared heat. 10 minutes passed. The ectothermic lethargy began to fade. Izuku's blood warmed, his heart rate accelerating to a steady, powerful thrum. He pushed himself up, the mattress groaning in protest under his immense weight. He was only 14, but he weighed nearly 300 pounds, almost entirely composed of hyperdense muscle, bone, and scale. He swung his legs over the edge of the bed, his clawed toes clicking softly against the hardwood floor. He looked at his reflection in the full-length mirror mounted on his closet door. The face staring back at him was a tragic blend of human and beast. He had his mother's wide, expressive eyes, though his irises were a striking, predatory gold with vertical slits, and a messy mop of dark green hair. But his jaw was slightly elongated, heavily muscled at the hinges, housing rows of serrated, conical teeth designed for gripping and tearing. His nose was slightly flattened, his nostrils capable of sealing shut watertight. He was a monster. Or, at least, that was what the world would call him if they ever saw him. Izuku looked away from the mirror, a familiar pit of anxiety settling in his stomach. It was time for the daily ritual. The disguise. He walked over to his dresser and pulled out his bindings. They were heavy-duty industrial compression wraps, the kind used to secure cargo on shipping freighters. Taking a deep breath, he began to wrap his tail. He started at the tip, pulling the fabric excruciatingly tight, folding the massive appendage up against the back of his left leg. The pain was immediate, a dull, throbbing ache as his spine was forced into an unnatural, restrictive posture. He gritted his teeth, wrapping the bindings around his waist, strapping his own tail to his thigh. Next came the oversized clothing. He pulled on a pair of heavily modified, baggy sweatpants that were 3 sizes too large, the thick material obscuring the unnatural bulk of his bound tail. He donned a skin-tight, heat-retaining underlayer to keep his core temperature up, followed by a massive, shapeless yellow hoodie. He pulled the hood up, casting his reptilian features into deep shadow. He slipped on a surgical mask, hiding his jaws and teeth. Lastly, he put on oversized, custom-made red sneakers, stuffing his clawed, webbed feet into the tight confines. By the time he was finished, he looked like a painfully shy, severely overweight, or perhaps just awkwardly bundled-up teenager. He was suffocating. The bindings dug into his scales, and his natural center of gravity was thrown entirely off balance, forcing him to walk with a slight, shuffling limp. But he was hidden. And in a world that hated him, hiding was survival. Izuku shuffled out of his room and down the narrow hallway of their coastal apartment. The air here always smelled faintly of salt and marshland. The Midoriyas lived on the absolute edge of Mizudafu, where the city bled into the tidal wetlands. It was isolated, cheap, and safe. Inko Midoriya was already in the kitchen. She looked up from the stove as Izuku entered, her expression softening into a mixture of boundless love and perpetual worry. Inko was a small, soft woman. She looked entirely human, possessing a weak telekinetic quirk. She was nothing like the massive, scaled apex predators she had given birth to. "Good morning, Izuku," she said gently, setting a plate of food on the table. It was an enormous portion, 3 pounds of raw, high-protein fish and a dozen hard-boiled eggs. His metabolism required massive caloric intake when he was active. "Morning, Mom," Izuku mumbled, pulling down his surgical mask just enough to eat. His voice was a deep, raspy baritone, laced with a faint, guttural vibration. Inko sat across from him, her eyes darting to the bulky shape of his leg where his tail was bound. "Is it too tight today? You're walking a bit stiffly." "It's fine," Izuku lied, swallowing a chunk of tuna whole. His teeth weren't made for chewing, they were made for tearing. His stomach acid, potent enough to dissolve bone, handled the rest. "I have to keep it tight. If it slips during pee." "I know, baby. I know." Inko reached across the table, placing her small, warm hand over his massive, scaled one. "Just be careful. Please." Izuku looked down at his plate. The fear in his mother's voice was a heavy anchor, dragging him down into memories he fought every day to suppress. He was 4 years old. The night was thick with the smell of smoke and gasoline. The marsh outside their old home was usually alive with the symphony of crickets and frogs, but that night, it was dead silent. The animals knew. The predators had come. Izuku had been hiding in the crawl space beneath the floorboards, clutching a stuffed All Might toy to his chest. His quirk had manifested weeks prior. He had sprouted a tiny, adorable green tail, much to his father's immense pride. Hisashi Midoriya was a giant of a man, a full crocodile mutant. He was a gentle giant, a construction worker who used his immense strength to build homes. But the creature rejection clan didn't care about his gentle nature. To the CRC, the crocodile lineage, the Sobek mutants, were a genetic abomination. They were apex predators, a relic of a primal past that the extremist purity group believed had no place in a modernized, clean quirk society. They had been hunting them down for years. The apex purge, they called it. Through the cracks in the floorboards, 4-year-old Izuku watched. He saw the heavy combat boots of the men in white masks. He heard his mother screaming. Then, he heard the roar. It was a sound that shook the very foundations of the earth. His father had transformed entirely, his muscles bulging as he threw himself at the armed intruders. He fought like a demon, his massive jaws crushing weapons, his tail shattering bones. He was a force of nature, buying time. "Run, Inko! Take him and run!" Hisashi had bellowed, his voice thick with blood. Those were the last words Izuku ever heard his father speak. The sharp, deafening crack of high-caliber rifle fire had echoed through the house. Then silence. Then the smell of burning flesh. Inko had dragged Izuku out the back window, fleeing into the deep swamp, wading through waist-deep, freezing muck to hide her son. They had survived, but Hisashi had not. The police arrived hours later, but they did little. Mutant-on-mutant or anti-mutant violence in the rural areas was often swept under the rug. The CRC vanished into the shadows. From that day on, Inko had enforced the rule. Hide. Shrink. Never show your scales. Never show your teeth. You are the last one, Izuku. The last Sobek. If they find you, they will kill you. Izuku blinked, snapping back to the present. The raw fish suddenly tasted like ash in his mouth. He pulled his surgical mask back up, securing it over his snout. "I'll be careful, Mom. I promise. I'm just an invisible, quirkless kid." Inko offered a sad, watery smile. "Have a good day at school, Izuku." The walk to Aldera Junior High was an exercise in endurance. By the time Izuku reached the school gates, his bound leg was screaming in agony, the circulation cut off to his heavy tail. Sweat beaded on his forehead, rolling down his scales beneath the thick hood. The spring air was warming up, and trapped inside his thermal layers, he was practically baking. He kept his head down, shuffling through the courtyard. The other students parted around him, giving him a wide berth. "Ugh, it's Midoriya," a girl whispered loudly to her friend. "Why does he always wear those gross, oversized clothes? He looks like a homeless person. I heard he's got some gross, weak mutant quirk," the boy next to her snickered. "Like, he's covered in warts or something. That's why he covers up. Total freak." Izuku ignored them. His hearing was exceptionally sharp, picking up their heartbeats, the rustle of their uniforms, the slight change in their breathing. He could hear the blood pumping through their veins. If he wanted to, he could cross the courtyard in a fraction of a second and snap the boy's neck before anyone even blinked. The predatory instinct in the back of his brain, the lizard brain, whispered to him, urging him to assert his dominance, to show these soft, fragile creatures what a true apex predator looked like. He pushed the instinct down, burying it under years of practiced cowardice. "I am Deku," he reminded himself. "I am nothing." He made it to his classroom and slumped into his desk at the back, curling his massive frame into the impossibly small wooden chair. He pulled out his notebook, Hero Analysis for the Future number 13. Despite his terrifying biology, despite his mother's warnings, Izuku clung to an impossible dream. He wanted to be a hero. He idolized All Might. All Might didn't care what you looked like. He saved everyone with a smile. Izuku wanted to be like that. He wanted to stand in the light, unashamed of his scales, and use his monstrous strength to protect people, just like his father had tried to do. But a hero with a villain's face? A hero who looked like a literal monster? It was a laughable fantasy. The classroom filled up. The teacher walked in, holding a stack of papers. "So, as third-year students, it's time to start thinking seriously about your futures," the teacher announced, his voice droning. "I'll pass out these career aptitude forms, but—" He suddenly tossed the papers into the air, laughing. "Who am I kidding? You all want to be heroes." The classroom erupted into cheers, students flashing their quirks. Fire flickered, limbs stretched, minor telekinesis floated pencils. It was a cacophony of light and sound. Izuku kept his hands flat on his desk, remaining perfectly still. "Hey, Teach! Don't lump me in with these bunch of losers." The voice cut through the noise like a serrated knife. Katsuki Bakugo leaned back in his chair, his feet propped up on his desk. Sparks crackled violently in his palms, the sharp, acrid scent of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin filling the room. Izuku's nostrils flared beneath his mask. The smell of explosives. The smell of a threat. His tail twitched involuntarily against its bindings, a sharp spike of pain shooting up his spine. "Ah, Bakugo. You're aiming for UA High, aren't you?" The teacher noted, looking impressed. The class gasped. "UA? The national school? The acceptance rate is like 0.2%, Bakugo smirked, standing up and puffing out his chest. "That's exactly why it's the only place for me. I aced the mock tests. I'm the only one at this crappy middle school who has the right stuff. I'll even surpass All Might and become the best hero out there. I'll leave my name in history." "Oh, right," the teacher glanced at his clipboard. "Midoriya, didn't you want to go to UA too?" The classroom froze. Complete dead silence. Then uproarious laughter. "Midoriya? No way. He can't even stand up straight. What's he gonna do, sweat on the villains? He's quirkless, right? Or just a defective mutant? You can't get into UA with a weak quirk?" Izuku shrank down, pulling his hood further over his face. He hated the teacher for mentioning it. He hated the laughter. But most of all, he hated the sudden, terrifying shift in the air pressure at the front of the room. Bakugo's explosive aura vanished, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. He slowly turned around, his crimson eyes locking onto Izuku's hunched form. Bakugo didn't laugh. Bakugo never laughed at Izuku. He was just angry. Always angry, Bakugo knew. Not everything, but enough. They had been playmates when they were toddlers, before the purge. Bakugo had seen Izuku's early mutation, the scales, the strength. He knew Izuku wasn't quirkless. He knew Izuku was hiding a massive, violent power beneath those oversized clothes. To Bakugo, whose entire worldview was based on flaunting power and striving for absolute victory, Izuku's decision to hide, to pretend to be weak, was a personal insult. It was a mockery of the very concept of strength. Boom! Bakugo slammed his palm onto Izuku's desk, an explosion shattering the wood and scorching Izuku's notebook. Izuku flinched, falling backward out of his chair, landing hard on his tailbone. The pain from the bindings was excruciating, drawing a sharp hiss from his lips. "Listen up, Deku," Bakugo growled, leaning over the ruined desk, smoke wafting from his palms. "You're worse than the rest of these rejects. You're a coward. You hide in your little swamp, pretending you're nothing. You think a freak like you could ever stand in the same arena as me? You think Yui wants a monster that can't even look people in the eye?" Izuku stared up at Bakugo. The nitroglycerin stung his sensitive eyes. His heart pounded, not out of fear, but out of a deeply suppressed, primal rage. The crocodile within him roared. Bite him. Snap his wrist, crush his ribs. Show him who the apex is. Izuku's jaw muscles bunched, his teeth grinding against each other. His amber eyes, glowing faintly in the shadow of his hood, narrowed into slits. Bakugo saw the shift. He saw the predator flash in Izuku's eyes. Bakugo grinned, a feral, challenging smirk. "Do it," Bakugo's eyes seemed to say. "Show them what you are. Fight me." Izuku broke eye contact. He slumped his shoulders, let out a pathetic whimper, and looked at the floor. "I just want to try, Kaken. There's no harm in trying." The disappointment on Bakugo's face was palpable. He scoffed, turning away in disgust. "You're pathetic. If you really want to be a hero so bad, do us all a favor. Take a swan dive off the roof and pray you get a better quirk in your next life." The cruelty of the words hung in the air. Izuku remained on the floor, his hands curled into fists, his claws digging so hard into his palms that they drew blood. He didn't say a word. He just gathered his scorched notebook and sat back down, a ghost in his own life. The school day ended. Izuku waited until everyone else had left before packing his bag. The pain in his leg was becoming unbearable. The bindings had been on for 8 hours. He needed to loosen them, or he risked permanent tissue damage. He didn't take his usual route home. Instead, he veered off toward an older, industrial part of the city, seeking out a specific underpass. It was a dark, damp concrete tunnel that ran beneath the local train tracks. The air inside was cool and smelled of stagnant water and moss. It reminded him of the marsh. It was comforting. He limped into the center of the tunnel, listening intently. There were no footsteps. No heartbeats nearby. He was alone. With a desperate sigh of relief, Izuku reached under his baggy sweatpants and began to furiously unbuckle the heavy industrial straps. Snap! 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 The moment the final buckle released, his body reacted with explosive force. His massive, 6-foot tail snapped outward, whipping through the air with the sound of a cracking whip. It slammed into the concrete wall of the tunnel, leaving a spiderweb of deep cracks in the stone. Izuku groaned, a deep, rumbling sound vibrating in his chest. He stretched his spine, rolling his shoulders. He pulled his hood down, taking a deep breath of the cool, damp air. "Ah, much better," he rasped, his voice vibrating off the walls. He let his tail sway behind him, the heavy thud of it dragging against the concrete echoing loudly. He flexed his clawed hands, feeling the circulation return to his extremities. For a fleeting moment, in the darkness of the tunnel, he felt powerful. He felt like himself. Gurgle. Squelch. Izuku froze. His slit pupils dilated. His ears swiveled slightly. The sound hadn't come from outside the tunnel. It came from the manhole cover 10 feet behind him. He spun around, dropping low to the ground instinctively, his tail counterbalancing his weight. The manhole cover was rattling. Green, viscous slime began to ooze from the grates, bubbling and shifting with a sickening sound, a cloak of medium size. A wet, gurgling voice echoed from the sludge. The slime suddenly erupted upward, forming a towering, fluid mass of dark green muck. 2 massive, bloodshot eyes and a set of jagged, liquid teeth manifested in the center of the sludge. Perfect. I was running out of time. It was a villain. A fluid-type mutant. Izuku's heart hammered. Panic seized him. Not because he was facing a villain, but because he was exposed. His tail was out. His hood was down. If he fought this thing, there might be collateral damage. The police would come. They would see him. The CRC would find him. Hide. His mother's voice shrieked in his mind. Izuku hesitated, taking a step backward. That hesitation was his downfall. With the speed of a striking cobra, the sludge villain lunged. Tentacles of thick, suffocating mud shot out, wrapping tightly around Izuku's torso, pinning his arms to his sides. Don't struggle, kid! The villain laughed madly, the slime creeping up Izuku's neck, forcing its way toward his mouth and nose. It'll only hurt for about 45 seconds. You're my hero, Izuku thrashed. His immense physical strength flared. He flexed his arms, attempting to shatter the sludge, but the material simply displaced and reformed. It was like trying to punch water. The slime forced its way past his surgical mask, entering his mouth. It tasted like sewage and rotting garbage. He couldn't breathe. His lungs burned. Fight back! His instincts roared. Bite it. Tear it apart. Use your tail, but he couldn't. He couldn't unleash his quirk here. Someone might see. Someone might record it. He would be hunted. He clamped his jaws shut, refusing to use his monstrous strength, refusing to be the beast the world thought he was. He reached up with his claws, desperately clawing at the sludge, but his fingers just slipped through. His vision began to darken at the edges. Black spots danced in his eyes. He was going to die here, suffocated in a dark tunnel, all because he was too afraid to show his true skin. Suddenly, the manhole cover beneath the villain was blown clean off its hinges. Fear not, young man, a voice, booming and radiant, echoed through the tunnel. It was a voice Izuku recognized instantly. It was the voice that had narrated his childhood, the voice that echoed from every television and radio. A towering figure stepped out of the shadows. He was massive, clad in a white t-shirt and cargo pants, his blonde hair styled into two prominent V-shaped bangs. He radiated power, heat, and absolute safety, all might. The number one hero didn't hesitate. He pulled back his fist, the sheer air pressure around his arm distorting the space in the tunnel. Texas. Smash! All Might threw a punch. He didn't hit the villain, he hit the air. The resulting wind pressure was a localized hurricane. The shockwaves slammed into the sludge villain, scattering its fluid body into thousands of droplets against the tunnel walls. Izuku was thrown backward, gasping violently for air as the slime retreated from his throat. He hit the ground hard, his massive tail curling protectively around his body. He was coughing, his lungs screaming for oxygen. Are you all right, citizen? All Might asked, turning around, a massive, brilliant smile plastered on his face. Izuku froze. His hood was still down. His tail was exposed. In a panic, Izuku scrambled backward, throwing his oversized yellow hoodie over his head and desperately pulling the baggy fabric of his sweatpants down to conceal his tail, tucking it agonizingly under his legs as he knelt. He kept his face firmly planted against the cold concrete, hiding his reptilian features. I'm fine, Izuku rasped, his voice trembling. Thank you. Thank you, All Might. All Might let out a booming laugh, reaching into his pocket and pulling out two large, empty soda bottles. With terrifying speed, he began scooping up the scattered remnants of the sludge villain, sealing them tightly inside the plastic. Excellent. Apologies for getting you caught up in my villain pursuit. I usually don't make mistakes like this, but I'm in a new city. All Might patted his pockets, ensuring the bottles were secure. Well, I must be off to turn this fellow into the police. Stay safe, young man. Wait. Izuku blurted out, pushing himself up onto his knees. He didn't look up, terrified All Might would see his face, but he couldn't let his idol leave. Not yet. He had to know. He had to ask the question that had been gnawing at his soul for 10 years. All Might paused, turning back slightly. I'm sorry, my boy, but a hero's work is never done. I must away, Please! Izuku shouted, the desperation in his voice echoing off the walls. Just one question. All Might stopped. He looked at the hunched, shivering boy in the oversized, mud-stained clothes. Make it quick. Izuku took a shuddering breath. He stared at his own clawed, webbed hands resting on the concrete. Can someone who looks like a villain become a hero? Izuku's voice broke. If someone has a quirk that is violent, a quirk that scares people, a mutant quirk that makes them look like a monster, can they still be a hero like you? Can they save people? Silence stretched in the tunnel. Only the faint drip of water could be heard. All Might looked at the boy. From All Might's perspective, he saw a traumatized teenager, hunched over, hiding his face, clearly insecure about a physical mutation. All Might knew the harsh reality of society. He knew that heroes with terrifying appearances often faced insurmountable discrimination, relegated to underground work, or worse, pushed into villainy by society's prejudice. He wanted to be encouraging, but he also had to be realistic. Being a hero was dangerous enough without society turning on you. A hero who looks like a monster, eh? All Might sighed, his booming voice softening into something more somber. It is a noble dream. But the reality of professional heroics is harsh. The public needs a symbol of peace, someone they can look at and feel safe. If your appearance terrifies the people you are trying to save, it can cause panic. It can cause harm. Izuku's breath hitched. It felt like a knife twisting in his chest. I cannot simply say yes, anyone can be a hero, All Might continued, his tone apologetic but firm. If your quirk puts you at odds with society, if it makes you a target, perhaps it is best to seek another path. You can help people in other ways. The police force, emergency rescue dispatch, they are noble professions. It is not bad to dream, young man, but you must also be realistic. With those crushing words, All Might bent his knees. I must go. Take care of yourself. Whoosh. All Might launched himself into the air, bursting out of the tunnel and into the afternoon sky, leaving Izuku alone in the damp darkness. Izuku didn't move. He stayed on his knees for a long time. The words echoed in his skull, overlapping with his mother's pleas, with Bakugo's taunts, with the memory of the gunfire that killed his father. You must be realistic. It was over. The number one hero, the man who saved everyone, had just confirmed what Izuku had always known deep down. There was no place in the light for Asobik. He was destined to die in the shadows, hiding his true face until the end of his days. He slowly stood up, numb. He fumbled with his heavy industrial straps, mechanically binding his tail back to his leg. He pulled the sweaty, restrictive garments back over his body, securing his surgical mask. He walked out of the tunnel, a hollow shell of a boy. He didn't know how long he walked. He just wandered the streets, his mind blank, his body aching. He was pulled from his stupor by the smell, smoke, burning asphalt, and nitroglycerin. Izuku blinked, his slit pupils narrowing. He looked down the street. A massive crowd had gathered at the entrance of the shopping district. Police barricades were set up, and the sky was choked with thick, black smoke. The sound of explosions rattled the windows of nearby shops. Drawn by a morbid curiosity, Izuku shuffled forward, pushing his way to the front of the crowd. He peered over the shoulders of the onlookers. His blood ran cold. The shopping arcade was a war zone. Fires raged out of control, fueled by constant, uncontrolled explosions. In the center of the chaos, towering above the flames, was the sludge villain. But how? Izuku thought, panic rising. All Might had him. Did he drop the bottles? Izuku's eyes darted frantically. The pro-heroes were there, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Empty Lady Backdraft, but none of them were doing anything. They were standing behind the police lines, shouting excuses. The fires were too hot. The villain was a hostage situation. They didn't have the right quirks. They were waiting for someone else. Hostage? Izuku looked closer at the churning mass of green slime. Trapped within the fluid body, thrashing wildly, was a boy with ash-blonde hair, Bakugo. The sludge villain had enveloped him entirely, leaving only his mouth and nose exposed. Bakugo was suffocating, his hands firing off frantic, massive explosions in a desperate bid for freedom. But the blasts only fueled the surrounding fires and gave the villain more weapons to use against the heroes. "I've got a prime body this time!" The sludge villain roared, laughing maniacally as it absorbed Bakugo's explosions. "Just a little longer and his quirk is mine," Izuku watched in horror. Bakugo was dying. The heroes were just watching. The crowd was just watching. Then, Bakugo's eyes shifted. Through the smoke, through the tears of pain and suffocation, his crimson eyes locked onto Izuku in the crowd. It was a fleeting glance. But in that split second, Izuku didn't see the arrogant, cruel bully who had told him to kill himself. He saw a boy who was terrified. He saw a boy pleading for his life. Something snapped. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was not the noble, selfless thought process of a traditional hero. It was something far older, far deeper, buried in the base of his reptilian brain. It was the instinct of the apex predator. A member of his territory was being attacked. The interlopers were weak. The prey was exposed. Before his conscious mind could even register the movement, Izuku Midoriya moved. He didn't run. He tore out of the crowd like a cannonball. "Hey! Kid, get back here!" Death Arms shouted, reaching out to grab him, but Izuku was already past the barricade, sprinting directly into the inferno. The heat washed over him. To a normal human, it would be agonizing. But to Izuku, whose ectothermic biology had been suppressed and freezing in his sweaty garments, the intense heat was an adrenaline shot straight to the heart. His blood boiled. His muscles swelled. "I can't fight like this," Izuku thought, his conscious mind catching up to his body. "The bindings. They'll restrict me." He didn't stop running. Instead, he reached down to his waist. With one violent, savage tug, he ripped the heavy industrial straps completely apart. The explosive release of tension was incredible. "Rise up!" His oversized sweatpants tore to shreds as his massive, heavily armored tail deployed, slamming into the asphalt behind him. The impact cracked the pavement, sending chunks of stone flying into the air. The crowd screamed. Izuku didn't care. He ripped off his oversized yellow hoodie, tossing it into the flames. He tore the surgical mask from his face. He stood in the center of the burning street, fully exposed to the world for the first time in 10 years. He was a terrifying sight. Stripped down to a tight, black sleeveless undershirt and ragged compression shorts, his true anatomy was on full display. His dark green scales gleamed in the firelight, the thick, bony ridges along his spine and tail rising aggressively. His hands, tipped with obsidian claws, flexed. His elongated jaw parted, revealing rows of razor-sharp, interlocking teeth. What is that?" Kamui Woods yelled, halting his advance. "A villain? It's a monster!" Someone in the crowd shrieked. The sludge villain paused, its massive, liquid eyes locking onto Izuku. You're that brat from the tunnel. What the hell are you?" Izuku didn't answer with words. He dropped down onto all fours. His biology was designed for amphibious ambush, for explosive bursts of kinetic energy. His powerful hind legs coiled beneath him, his massive tail raising slightly to balance his heavy upper body. He let out a roar. It wasn't a human yell. It was a primal, guttural bellow, a deafening hiss of displaced air and vibrating vocal cords that shook the windows of the surrounding buildings. Then, he launched himself. He moved with a terrifying, silent speed, his claws digging deep trenches into the asphalt to propel his heavy mass forward. He cleared the distance between himself and the villain in a fraction of a second. "Get away from me!" The sludge villain screamed, whipping a massive tentacle of concentrated muck toward Izuku's head. Izuku didn't dodge. He spun his body, letting the tentacle strike his back. The sludge slammed into his dense, bony osteoderms, splashing uselessly against his armor. Izuku didn't even flinch. He used the momentum of his spin to whip his massive tail around. Crash! The spiked club of his tail slammed into the sludge villain's midsection with the force of a wrecking ball. The sheer kinetic energy blew a massive hole through the villain's fluid body, severing its hold on Bakugo's lower half. Bakugo gasped for air, his eyes wide in absolute shock as he looked at the massive, scaled beast in front of him. "Deku, Kaken!" Izuku growled, his voice distorted and monstrous. "Hold your breath." Before the villain could reform, Izuku lunged. He didn't use his fists. He opened his massive jaws and clamped his teeth directly onto the thickest, most solidified part of the sludge villain's eye stalk. His bite force was measured in tons. Once he latched on, nothing in the world could pry his jaws apart. Arg! My eye! Let go! The villain shrieked, thrashing violently, attempting to force its slime down Izuku's throat to suffocate him again. But Izuku's nostrils sealed shut. He planted his heavily clawed feet into the burning asphalt. He engaged his core, his massive neck muscles bulging, and he initiated the death roll. Izuku violently spun his entire 300-pound, armored body along his longitudinal axis. The raw, terrifying torque of the spin tore the sludge villain apart. The villain's fluid structure couldn't withstand the rotational shear force. With the sickening sound of tearing slime, the villain was violently ripped away from Bakugo. Bakugo was thrown clear, landing hard on the pavement, coughing up sludge and gasping for air. Izuku finished his roll, landing crouched on the ground, spitting a massive glob of the villain's slime out of his mouth in disgust. He stood up, his massive tail swishing aggressively behind him, his chest heaving as he glared at the scattered, whimpering remains of the villain. The street was dead silent. The fires crackled, but nobody spoke. The heroes were frozen in shock. The crowd was staring, wide-eyed and terrified. Izuku stood there, the adrenaline slowly leaving his system. As the heat of the battle faded, the cold reality of the situation crashed down upon him. He looked at his hands. He looked at his tail. He looked at the horrified faces of the crowd. Monster. Villain. Freak. The whispers began to ripple through the onlookers. Izuku panicked. He took a step backward, his tail tucking defensively between his legs. His predatory posture vanished, replaced by the hunched, terrified body language of a hunted animal. He covered his face with his scaled hands, letting out a pathetic, whimpering whine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Please don't shoot me. Please don't hurt my mom. Hey! You! Death Arms marched forward, looking entirely intimidated but trying to project authority. What do you think you're doing? Are you crazy? You have a quirk like that, and you just charge in without a license? You could have killed the hostage. Kamui Wood stepped up beside him. Your reckless actions endangered everyone. What is your name, boy? Izuku couldn't speak. He just trembled, sinking to his knees, waiting for the police to slap quirk-suppressant cuffs on him, waiting for the CRC to read about him in the news and come finish what they started 10 years ago. I am sorry, Izuku choked out, a tear slipping from his golden eye. I didn't. I just couldn't watch him die. Hold on a second. A skeletal, gaunt man pushed his way through the crowd. He had wild blonde hair and wore a baggy white t-shirt. He was coughing into a handkerchief, but his blue eyes were blazing with an intensity that commanded the entire street. Toshinori Yagi, the true, deflated form of All Might, walked past the heroes, past the police, and stood directly in front of the kneeling, scaled teenager. Toshinori had seen the whole thing. He had been standing in the crowd, too weakened to transform, cursing his own uselessness as he watched a middle schooler suffocate. But then he had seen him, the boy from the tunnel. The boy who had asked if a monster could be a hero. Toshinori had seen the boy shed his disguise, revealing a terrifying, heavily mutated body that was clearly the source of immense personal trauma and societal fear. He had seen the boy risk exposure, risk hatred, risk everything, just to save the life of a peer. Toshinori dropped to one knee, looking Izuku directly in his reptilian eyes. You! Toshinori whispered, loud enough for only Izuku to hear. You are the boy from the tunnel. Izuku flinched, recognizing the piercing blue eyes. Why yes. I'm sorry. I couldn't be realistic. Toshinori smiled, a small, sad, incredibly proud smile. He reached out, placing a skeletal hand on Izuku's massive, scale-plated shoulder. He didn't flinch at the rough texture. He didn't look at Izuku like a monster. Young man, Toshinori said, his voice steady and firm. Of all the people here today, the pros, the police, myself included, you were the only one who acted. You, who had the most to lose by revealing yourself, threw it all away to save a life. Izuku stared at him, his breath hitching. I was wrong, Toshinori continued, standing up and turning to face the scolding heroes. "Leave the boy alone. He did what none of you had the courage to do." The heroes fell silent, shocked by the sudden intervention of this strange, sickly civilian. Toshinori turned back to Izuku. "Go home, young man. Wash up. Rest. I will find you." The walk home was a blur. Izuku was shivering violently, the adrenaline crash plunging his ectothermic body into a near-torpid state. He didn't have his heavy clothes anymore. He walked through the twilight streets of Mizurufu in nothing but his torn undershirt and shorts, his massive tail dragging heavily on the sidewalk. People stared. Mothers pulled their children away. Cars slowed down to gawk at the dinosaur-like teenager walking down the street. Izuku kept his head down, tears silently rolling down his snout. He was dead. His life was over. The secret was out. He reached the coastal outskirts, the smell of the marsh filling his lungs. He was exhausted. He just wanted to crawl under his heat lamps and disappear. "I am here!" Izuku jumped, nearly slipping on the damp pavement. Standing under a flickering street lamp, radiating steam and raw power in his muscle form, was All Might. Before Izuku could speak, All Might deflated in a massive cloud of steam, returning to the skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi. He coughed up a bit of blood, wiping his mouth with his sleeve. "Sorry about that. Have to keep up appearances," Toshinori wheezed, walking toward Izuku. "All Might," Izuku whispered, stepping back defensively, his tail curling around his legs. Why are you here? Are you taking me to the police?" "No, my boy," Toshinori said gently. He looked at Izuku, taking in the full, magnificent, terrifying biology of the boy. The thick scales, the immense muscle density, the sharp claws. "I came to apologize. I told you to be realistic. I told you that a hero couldn't look like a villain. I was a fool." Izuku's eyes widened. "Top heroes have stories about them from their school days," Toshinori said, stepping closer. "Most of their stories have one thing in common. Their bodies moved before they had a chance to think." Izuku remembered the moment. The feeling of his legs propelling him forward before his brain had even processed the danger. Tears welled up in his golden eyes, blurring his vision. "That was true for you today, wasn't it?" Toshinori asked. Izuku nodded, a choked sob escaping his jaws. "You endured years of hiding. You endured the fear of society. Yet, when someone needed saving, you cast off your armor and became a monster for the sake of justice." Toshinori pointed a long, bony finger directly at Izuku's chest. "You can become a hero." Izuku collapsed. His heavy, scaled knees hit the pavement with a loud thud. He buried his face in his clawed hands, weeping openly, the deep, guttural sobs of a boy who had been told his entire life that he was unworthy of the light. Toshinori walked forward, placing a comforting hand on Izuku's head, entirely unbothered by the sharp ridges of bone. "I know what you are, young Midoriya," Toshinori said softly. "I have read the restricted files on the Apex Purge. I know of the Sobek lineage. I know that you are the last of your kind." Izuku snapped his head up in terror. "You know? The CRC. If they find out I'm alive, they will have to go through me," Toshinori interrupted, his blue eyes flashing with the wrath of the #1 hero. "I will not let the darkness of this society snuff out a flame as bright as yours. I will sponsor you. I will train you to master that incredible body of yours. And I will ensure you enter Yui High School, where you will be protected behind the strongest walls in Japan." Toshinori held out his hand. "The world may see a beast, young man. But I see the heart of a true hero. Will you let me guide you?" Izuku looked at the skeletal hand offered to him. He looked at his own hand, dark green, heavily scaled, ending in lethal claws. For the first time in his life, he didn't hate his hand. He didn't want to hide it. He reached out and grasped All Might's hand. "Yes," Izuku rasped, his voice vibrating with newfound resolve. "I will." The air at Dagoba Municipal Beach tasted of salt, rust, and the metallic tang of dried blood. It was 4 a.m. The sun had not yet crested the horizon, and the biting chill of the autumn morning hung heavy in the fog. For a normal human, the temperature was merely uncomfortable. For an ectothermic mutant like Izuku Midoriya, it was paralyzing. Again, the booming voice of Toshinori Yagi cut through the roar of the ocean waves. Izuku let out a deep, rattling hiss. His breath materialized into thick clouds of white steam. He was on his hands and knees in the wet sand, a massive industrial harness strapped across his broad, scale-plated chest. Thick steel chains ran from the harness, dragging across the beach to their anchor point, a rusted, 3-ton pickup truck half buried in the sand. My blood is freezing, Izuku ground out, his jaw trembling. His amber eyes, featuring vertical slit pupils, were sluggish. The thick, swamp-green scales covering his arms, back, and massive tail were pale, robbed of their vibrant color by the cold. Your villains will not wait for the sun to rise, young Midoriya. Toshinori barked, standing a few yards away in his baggy clothes, a stopwatch in his skeletal hand. Your biology demands heat to generate kinetic energy. But you cannot rely on ideal conditions. You must force your body to adapt. Your heart is a furnace. Stoke the fire. Pull! Izuku slammed his clawed, webbed hands into the wet sand. He squeezed his eyes shut. Toshinori was right. If he was going to be a hero, he couldn't just curl up and hibernate every time the temperature dropped. He had to override 10 million years of reptilian evolution with sheer, unadulterated human willpower. I am not just a beast, Izuku thought, gritting his razor-sharp teeth. I am a hero. He engaged his core. The muscles beneath his thick dermal armor bunched and expanded. He dug his heavily clawed toes into the earth. And then, he engaged his tail. The 6-foot appendage, as thick as a tree trunk, slammed against the sand, acting as a massive counterbalance. With a guttural roar that vibrated the loose trash around them, Izuku drove his weight forward. The chains snapped taut. The steel groaned. Slowly, agonizingly, the 3-ton truck shifted. The tires dragged through the sand, leaving deep, churning trenches. Izuku crawled forward on all fours, his powerful limbs acting like pistons. Every inch was a battle against his own freezing blood. He pulled it 10 feet. Then 20. Then 50. When he finally crossed the makeshift finish line drawn in the sand, Izuku collapsed. The sand sprayed around him as his heavy body hit the ground. He lay there, his chest heaving, his mouth slightly open as he panted, taking in massive amounts of oxygen. Toshinori walked over, handing Izuku a massive thermal blanket and a thermos of boiling hot green tea. Excellent work, my boy. Your anaerobic endurance has increased by 400% since we began. Izuku wrapped the blanket around his massive frame, shivering as he took the thermos. He didn't drink the tea. He poured the boiling liquid directly down his throat, letting the intense heat radiate from his stomach outward. His stomach lining, designed to digest rotting meat and bone, didn't even register the burn. It still hurts, Izuku rasped, his deep baritone voice muffled by the blanket. The cold. It feels like my muscles are turning into lead. That is the burden of your quirk, Izuku, Toshinori said softly, taking a seat on a nearby rusted refrigerator. Your power output is staggering. In a pure contest of physical strength, you are already approaching the baseline of some top-tier pro heroes. But your stamina and thermal regulation are your Achilles heel. That is why we spent these 10 months not just building your muscles, but forging your mind. Izuku looked at his hands. For 10 years, he had bound his tail, hunched his shoulders, and worn oversized clothes to hide his monstrous physique. He had deliberately weakened himself, allowing his muscles to atrophy so he wouldn't look like a threat. Toshinori had undone all of that. He had forced Izuku to stand tall. He had taught him how to balance his immense weight, how to use his heavy tail for agility rather than just destruction, and most importantly, how to control the predatory instincts that flared up whenever he engaged in combat. The entrance exam is in 4 hours, Toshinori said, looking out at the rising sun. The golden rays finally broke over the water, hitting Izuku's scales. Izuku let out a long sigh of relief as the ambient heat washed over him, his lethargy instantly beginning to melt away. Are you ready to show the world the last Sobek? Izuku threw off the thermal blanket. He stood up to his full, imposing height. He was barely 15, yet he stood at a towering 6'2", weighing a dense, armored 320 pounds. His dark green scales gleamed in the morning light. I'm ready, Izuku said, his golden eyes narrowing with determination. I'm going to rip that exam apart. The Midoriya household was unusually quiet that morning. Inko Midoriya stood in the hallway, holding a large clothing bag. Her hands were trembling slightly, but she wore a proud, teary-eyed smile. Izuku emerged from his bedroom. He wasn't wearing his standard, oversized yellow hoodie. He wasn't wearing his restrictive bindings. He wasn't wearing his surgical mask. He was wearing the custom-tailored UA exam tracksuit his mother had spent the last month sewing for him. It was a deep, forest green color, made of a highly specialized, stretchable, heat-retaining fabric she had procured from a mutant-friendly support company. The back of the jacket featured a series of vertical, reinforced slits that allowed the jagged, bony osteoderms along his spine to protrude comfortably without tearing the fabric. But the most prominent feature was the lower half. The pants were loose and breathable, featuring a massive, reinforced opening at the base of the spine. His tail swayed freely behind him, the heavy, spiked tip thumping gently against the floorboards. "Oh, Izuku," Inko whispered, bringing her hands to her mouth. You look so handsome. You look just like him." Izuku's breath hitched. To be compared to his father, the massive, brave crocodile mutant who had died protecting them, was the highest compliment he could ever receive. He stepped forward and wrapped his massive, heavily muscled arms around his tiny mother, being incredibly careful not to crush her. "Thank you, Mom. For everything," Izuku rumbled softly. "For keeping me safe all these years. You don't need to hide anymore, my brave boy," Inko sniffled, patting his scaled back. Go show them what a hero looks like." The walk to UA High School was a surreal experience. For the first time in his conscious memory, Izuku walked down the streets of Muzurifu with his head held high. He didn't shuffle. He didn't hide his face. His massive tail swayed rhythmically behind him, a hypnotic pendulum of raw power. People stared. It was unavoidable. A boy with the jaw of a crocodile, eyes of a predator, and a tail that looked capable of leveling a building was not a common sight, even in a society of quirks. Some people crossed the street. A few mothers pulled their children closer. The old Izuku would have shrunk away, apologizing profusely, desperate to disappear. The new Izuku simply closed his eyes, felt the warmth of the sun on his scales, and kept walking. "Let them look," he told himself, channeling Tashinori's unwavering confidence. "I am not a villain. I am going to save them." As the massive, imposing glass gates of UA High School came into view, Izuku felt his heart rate spike. The sheer scale of the campus was intimidating. Hundreds of hopeful students were funneling toward the main auditorium. "Stupid Deku. Get out of my way." The voice was like a match striking against a rough surface. Izuku stopped. He turned slowly. Katsuki Bakugo stood a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. Bakugo's crimson eyes were narrowed into venomous slits, taking in Izuku's unhidden form. Bakugo hadn't seen Izuku since the sludge villain incident 10 months ago. He hadn't seen Izuku's transformation from a hunched, pathetic coward into this towering, muscular apex predator. Bakugo didn't look scared. He looked furious. "You think taking off the leash makes you a threat?" Bakugo sneered, marching right up to Izuku. Despite Izuku being taller and significantly heavier, Bakugo projected an aura of absolute dominance. "You think showing off those ugly scales makes you better than me? You're still just a swamp rat. A freak. They're going to take one look at you in there and throw you in a cage." Izuku looked down at the explosive blonde. The predatory instinct, the lizard brain, flared in the back of his mind. Bite him. Snap his collarbone. Establish dominance. Izuku took a deep, steadying breath, suppressing the beast. He didn't cower. He didn't look at the ground. He maintained solid, unblinking eye contact with Bakugo. "I'm not hiding anymore, Kaken," Izuku said, his raspy voice vibrating in his chest. "I'm here to pass the exam. Just like you." Bakugo's eye twitched. The lack of fear in Izuku's voice infuriated him more than any insult could. Sparks popped violently off Bakugo's palms. "Don't get in my way, monster, or I'll blow you and your ugly tail to pieces." Bakugo shoved past Izuku, storming toward the entrance. Izuku watched him go, his tail giving an agitated twitch. He sighed, adjusting his jacket, and took a step forward. His massive, webbed foot caught the edge of a raised paving stone. Because his center of gravity had shifted so drastically over the last 10 months, transitioning from bound to unbound. His spatial awareness on concrete was still slightly clumsy. Izuku pitched forward, his heavy body plummeting toward the pavement. Oh no. 300 pounds hitting the concrete. I'm going to crack the floor on my first day. He braced for the impact, but it never came. Instead, he felt a strange, weightless sensation wash over him. He hovered completely parallel to the ground, suspended in midair. Oops. Are you okay? Izuku flailed his limbs slightly, swimming in the air, before twisting his heavy neck to look behind him. A girl with bobbed brown hair and rosy cheeks was standing there, her fingers pressed together, panting slightly. She looked incredibly strained. Wow, you are really heavy. The girl grunted, sweat beading on her forehead. I'm so sorry for using my quirk on you without asking. But I figured it would be bad luck to faceplant right before the exam. Izuku stared at her. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't backing away in terror. She had just touched him. Our release. She gasped, pressing her hands together. Gravity slammed back into Izuku. He dropped the remaining few inches, his heavy legs taking the weight effortlessly, his tail slapping the ground with a loud thud to steady himself. Thank you, Izuku stuttered, his terrifying jaw parting to reveal his rows of serrated teeth. He tried to offer a smile, but he knew it usually looked more like a threat display. The girl blinked, looking up at his towering, scaled form. Her eyes widened slightly, taking in his reptilian features, the intense amber eyes, and the sheer mass of his tail. Izuku braced himself for the inevitable look of revulsion. Instead, her eyes practically turned into stars. Whoa! Your quirk is so cool! She beamed, stepping closer to examine his arm. You look like a dinosaur. Are those real scales? That looks like it has so much defensive power. I'm Achiko Uraraka, by the way. Izuku's brain short-circuited. Cool? She thinks I look cool? I'm Izuku Midoriya, he mumbled, a dark green blush spreading beneath his scales. And yes, they're real. It's a mutant type. Well, it's super manly. Good luck today, Midoriya. I've gotta go find my seat. Uraraka waved enthusiastically, jogging toward the doors. Izuku stood there for a long moment, his tail swishing lazily behind him in a display of pure contentment. For the first time in his life, someone outside of his mother and All Might had looked at his true form and smiled. I can do this. The orientation in the massive auditorium was excruciating. Izuku sat perfectly still, trying to make himself as small as possible in the tiny auditorium seat. It was a physical impossibility. His broad shoulders bumped against the students next to him, and his massive tail had to be curled tightly around his own legs, the heavy tip resting near his boots. Down on the stage, the voice hero, Present Mike, was screaming into the microphone, explaining the rules of the practical exam. It was a mock city battle. They were to destroy robots designated as 1-pointers, 2-pointers, and 3-pointers to rack up a score. Izuku held a tiny pencil in his massive, clawed hand, trying to jot down notes in his notebook. His anxiety was spiking. The room was warm, which was good for his blood, but the sheer number of people staring at the back of his head was making his predatory instincts itch. He began to subconsciously tap his tail against the floor. Thud. 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 Excuse me. A tall boy with glasses and a severe haircut stood up abruptly, pointing rigidly at Present Mike. You stated there are 4 types of villains on the printout. If this is a misprint, UA, the most prominent school in Japan, should be ashamed of that foolish mistake. The boy then whipped around, pointing his rigid hand directly at Izuku. And you? The large student with the reptilian mutation. Izuku froze. The entire auditorium turned to look at him. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto his scales, his jaws, his tail. You have been thumping your tail against the floor for the last 10 minutes. The bespectacled boy scolded loudly. The structural disturbance is incredibly distracting. If you cannot control your massive appendages and treat this exam with the dignity it deserves, I suggest you leave immediately. A wave of snickers and nervous whispers spread through the room. Look at that freak. Is he a villain? He looks like one. Look at those teeth. Izuku felt a wave of crushing humiliation. He instinctively hunched his shoulders, pulling his tail tightly against his chest, wrapping his arms around it. I am sorry, he rasped, his voice vibrating nervously. I'll keep it still. All right, examinee number 7111. Present Mike shouted, diffusing the tension. Thanks for the great message. The fourth villain type is worth 0 points. It's an obstacle. I recommend my listeners run away from it. The presentation concluded shortly after. Izuku practically fled the auditorium, desperate to escape the judging eyes. He boarded the bus that transported the examinees to Battle Center B. As he stood in front of the towering gates of the mock city, Izuku took a deep breath. This was it. No more hiding. No more apologizing for his biology. He unzipped his green jacket slightly, letting the cool morning air hit his chest. He cracked his neck, the thick muscles bulging. He stretched his tail out behind him, letting it sweep back and forth across the pavement, claiming his space. The other examinees gave him a wide berth. Even the tall boy with the glasses eyed him warily from a distance. Uraraka was somewhere in the crowd, looking nervous. Right, let's start. Present Mick's voice boomed from the watchtower. What's wrong? There are no countdowns in real battles. Run, run, run! The die is cast. The massive gates shrieked as they opened. The other students hesitated for a split second, confused by the sudden start. Izuku did not. His reptilian brain, the instinct he had fought to suppress for a decade, was finally given a command he could agree with. Hunt! Izuku dropped to all fours. To the horrified shock of the other students, the massive, 300-pound teenager exploded forward with the terrifying, kinetic speed of a striking crocodile. His clawed hands and feet tore into the pavement, launching his heavy body forward. He moved with a horrifying, slithering grace, his torso staying low to the ground while his legs pumped like pistons, his heavy tail whipping back and forth to maintain absolute balance. He crossed the starting threshold before anyone else had even taken a step, disappearing into the concrete canyon of the mock city. What was that speed? One student gasped. Less talking, more running. Ida yelled, sprinting after him. Izuku was deep in the city. His senses shifted. His human anxiety vanished, replaced by the cold, calculating clarity of an apex predator. His slit pupils dilated, taking in the micro-movements of the shadows. His nostrils flared, filtering out the smell of asphalt and locking onto the scent of refined oil and electrical ozone. His ears swiveled, catching the whirring of gears 3 blocks away. Target acquired. Izuku rounded a corner on all fours, his claws tearing grooves into the brick wall as he drifted the turn. A massive, tank-like 3-pointer rolled into the intersection, its red optical sensor locking onto him. Target acquired. Commencing extermination. The robot raised a dual-barrel missile launcher. Izuku didn't alter his trajectory. He didn't run away. He accelerated. When he was 10 feet away, Izuku pushed off his hind legs, his massive leg muscles propelling his heavy body into the air. He soared over the robot's missile volley. As he descended, Izuku twisted his body. He didn't throw a punch. He opened his jaws to an impossible, terrifying angle. Crunch. Izuku's jaws clamped directly down onto the 3-pointer's armored head. His conical, serrated teeth pierced the thick steel plating as easily as a hot knife through butter. The bite force of a normal crocodile was measured at 3,000 psi. Izuku's mutant bite force was close to 12,000 psi. The metal groaned, shrieked, and then violently collapsed under the pressure. Izuku crushed the robot's central processor in a single bite. He landed heavily on top of the machine, spitting out a mouthful of shattered optical glass and motor oil. The taste was vile, but the surge of adrenaline was intoxicating. 3 points, Izuku hissed, his voice dropping to a terrifying, guttural rumble. He didn't stop to admire his work. He heard more gears grinding. 2 2-pointers and a 1-pointer emerged from an alleyway. Izuku leapt off the destroyed tank. He landed in the center of the street, planting his heavy boots firmly into the asphalt. As the 3 robots charged him, extending their mechanical blades, Izuku spun his upper body, building monumental torque in his core. He unleashed his tail. The massive, spiked appendage whipped around in a brutal, 360-degree arc. It moved faster than the eye could track, breaking the sound barrier with a sharp crack. The tail slammed into the front legs of the robots. The kinetic impact was akin to being hit by a freight train. The three robots were instantly swept off their feet, their lower chassis completely shattered. They flew through the air, crashing into the side of a nearby building in a shower of sparks and mangled metal. 5, 6, 7, 8 points, Izuku muttered, his tail settling heavily behind him. He dropped back to all fours and sprinted down the next street, a terrifying blur of green scales and raw destruction. High above the mock city, hidden within a darkened observation room, the faculty of UA High watched the monitors. "We have quite a crop this year," Midnight purred, crossing her legs as she watched a boy with explosions tear through a robot on monitor A. Indeed, Nedzu, the principal, sat in his high chair, sipping tea. "But I must admit, my eyes are drawn to monitor C. He is putting on quite the display." All the teachers shifted their gaze. On the screen, Izuku Midoriya was an absolute menace. He was fighting 3 two-pointers simultaneously. He tanked a punch from one, his thick osteoderms deflecting the metal fist without a scratch, before grabbing the robot's arm, ripping it clean off its socket, and using it as a club to smash the other two. He moved with a brutal, savage efficiency. He didn't waste movement. He didn't posture. He simply dismantled his targets, with terrifying speed. "Good lord," Snipe muttered, adjusting his mask. "That kid is brutal. What's his quirk?" Izuku Midoriya, Aizawa's Shota drawled, looking at a clipboard, his tired eyes narrowed in interest. "Quirk, Sobek. A mutant class heteromorph. Complete crocodile biology. Extreme strength, dermal armor, aquatic adaptation, and an immense bite force. He's not fighting like a human," Ectoplasm noted. "He's utilizing ambush predator tactics. Short bursts of overwhelming speed followed by devastating, lethal strikes. It's incredibly effective, but it's quite vicious. I see his file says he was raised in the rural coastal areas," Nedzu observed, his beady eyes calculating. "An ectothermic mutant of that size requires immense caloric intake and thermal regulation. Yet, he seems to be maintaining his body heat purely through the kinetic friction of his own violent movements. Fascinating. And deeply concerning." Toshinori Yagi, standing in his deflated form in the back corner of the room, clenched his fists. He felt a swell of immense pride. "You're doing it, my boy. You're showing them your true strength." "He's got 45 points already," Midnight noted, impressed. "But he looks like he's running entirely on instinct. Let's see how he handles a true disruption to his hunt." Nedzu smiled, bringing his paw down on a large, red button on the console. "Let's see the true grit of this year's examinees." Down in Battle Center B, Izuku had just crushed the chassis of a two-pointer under his heavy foot. He was panting heavily. The constant movement was generating enough heat to keep his blood warm, but he was burning through his oxygen reserves at a rapid pace. He wiped a smear of motor oil from his scaled cheek, counting his score in his head. 52 points. That should be enough. That has to be enough to pass. Suddenly, the ground beneath his feet violently lurched. Izuku stumbled, his heavy tail slamming down to catch his balance. The air pressure in the city changed drastically. A shadow fell over the street, blocking out the sun. Izuku looked up. At the end of the main avenue, a towering, skyscraper-sized behemoth of gray steel emerged. It crushed a 4-story building beneath its massive treads. Its singular, glowing red eye swept the street. The zero-pointer. The sheer scale of the machine triggered something deep within Izuku's biology. It was an ancient, evolutionary warning system. When faced with a predator significantly larger than yourself, there was only one biological imperative: flee. Izuku's pupils contracted into microscopic slits. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every fiber of his reptilian brain screamed at him to run, to dive into the nearest body of water, to hide in the mud. Around him, the other examinees were doing exactly that. "Run away! It's too big! We're gonna die!" Izuku took a step backward, his tail curling tightly between his legs in an instinctual defensive posture. He prepared to drop to all fours and sprint in the opposite direction. "I'll please help!" Izuku froze. His highly sensitive ears twitched, picking up the sound through the rumbling of the falling debris. He snapped his head toward the source. 50 yards away, sitting directly in the path of the advancing zero-pointer, was the nice girl from the entrance. Uraraka. A massive chunk of concrete rubble had fallen, pinning her right leg to the asphalt. She was frantically trying to push it off, tears streaming down her face, but she was exhausted. The 0-pointer raised its massive, hydraulic foot, preparing to crush the entire intersection. Izuku's lizard brain screamed. Leave her! Flee! Survive! But Izuku Midoriya was not just a crocodile. He was the boy who had spent 10 months dragging trash across a freezing beach. He was the boy who had run into a blazing inferno to save his tormentor. He was the student of All Might. The hero instinct violently crushed the predator instinct. Arg! Izuku let out a deafening, earth-shattering roar. He didn't run away. He dropped to all fours and sprinted directly toward the colossal machine. What is he doing? The boy with glasses yelled from the safety of the retreating crowd, turning back in horror. Is he insane? Izuku covered the 50 yards in 3 seconds. He slid to a halt next to Uraraka, his massive tail sweeping a path through the dust. Midoriya? Uraraka gasped, looking up at his towering, scaled form. Izuku didn't have time to speak. He looked up. The 0-pointer's foot was descending, casting a shadow of absolute death over them. He couldn't pull Uraraka free in time. The rubble was too heavy, and if he yanked her, he would tear her leg off. He couldn't punch the foot away. He didn't have the sheer explosive shockwave capability of someone like All Might. He had to cripple it. Izuku looked at the descending foot. He analyzed the structure with terrifying speed. Steel armor plating, reinforced joints, and there, partially exposed behind the main ankle joint, a bundle of thick, pressurized hydraulic fluid lines pulsing with immense pressure. Izuku didn't hesitate. He leapt upward, launching his 300-pound body directly at the descending foot. He bypassed the armor plating. He wrapped his massive, muscular arms around the thick steel piston of the ankle to anchor himself. He opened his jaws to their absolute maximum limit, and he bit down directly onto the bundle of hydraulic lines. The taste of pressurized chemical fluid flooded his mouth. His teeth sank through the reinforced rubber and steel mesh, locking securely. Rag! Izuku clamped his jaws completely shut. Then, he let go of the ankle with his arms, kicked his legs out into the empty air, and engaged his core. He initiated the death roll. With his jaws acting as an unbreakable anchor point, Izuku violently threw his entire body weight into a brutal, high-speed lateral spin. He became a 300-pound buzzsaw of kinetic torque. The mechanical components shrieked. The 0-pointer was designed to withstand explosive impacts, lasers, and blunt force trauma. It was not designed to withstand the localized, extreme torsional shear force of an apex predator tearing its internal arteries apart. Snap! Ryup! PSSSHHH! The hydraulic lines ruptured violently. A massive geyser of black fluid sprayed across the street. Izuku's spin tore through the primary stabilization piston. He ripped a massive chunk of machinery completely out of the robot's ankle, plummeting back down to the earth with the mangled metal clamped in his jaws. Izuku landed heavily on his feet, his tail slapping the ground to arrest his momentum. He spat the ruined metal onto the asphalt. Above them, the 0-pointer lost all hydraulic pressure in its right leg. The massive foot, unable to support the thousands of tons of weight above it, buckled instantly. The colossal machine tilted sideways. The internal gyros screamed in protest, but the damage was catastrophic. With a slow, agonizing groan of tearing metal, the 0-pointer crashed into a row of buildings on the adjacent block, missing Izuku and Uraraka entirely. The impact sent a massive cloud of dust and debris washing over the street. Silence descended on Battle Center B, save for the crackle of localized fires and the hissing of escaping steam. Izuku stood over Uraraka, panting heavily. His chest heaved. Black hydraulic fluid stained his snout, dripping from his serrated teeth. His eyes were wide, the vertical slits pulsing as he fought to rein in his adrenaline. He quickly turned around, dropping to his knees. He grabbed the chunk of concrete pinning Uraraka's leg. With a grunt, his massive arm muscles bulged, and he tossed the heavy stone aside as easily as if it were a piece of styrofoam. Are you okay? Izuku rasped, his voice rough and distorted. Uraraka stared up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and awe. Yes. Thank you. Izuku offered her a clawed hand, gently pulling her up. As the dust began to clear, The other examinees crept back into the street. They stopped in a wide circle around Izuku and Uraraka. They stared at the fallen colossal robot, and then they stared at Izuku. Izuku wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked at the faces of his peers. He expected to see awe. He expected to see gratitude. Instead, he saw absolute terror. The boy with the glasses was staring at Izuku's blood-stained teeth, the blood being black hydraulic fluid, with naked fear. A boy with blonde hair was backing away slowly. Several students were whispering, pointing at his massive, terrifying jaw. "Did you see how he tore that thing apart? He bit it. He literally bit it to death. That's not a hero. That's a monster." The whispers pierced Izuku's heart sharper than any blade. The adrenaline vanished, replaced by a suffocating wave of old, familiar shame. He had shown them his true self. He had used his quirk to the fullest. And they hated him for it. They feared him. Izuku hunched his broad shoulders. He curled his massive tail tightly around his legs, trying to make himself look smaller. He averted his gaze, looking down at his clawed feet, unable to meet their terrified eyes. "I'm sorry," he thought, tears stinging the corners of his eyes. "I didn't mean to scare you. Time's up." President Mick's voice rang out, ending the exam. Izuku didn't move. He just stood there in the center of the destruction, feeling more isolated than he ever had in his entire life. Suddenly, a small, warm hand grasped his massive, scaly forearm. Izuku flinched, looking down. Uraraka was holding his arm. She was putting her weight on her good leg, smiling up at him with absolute sincerity. She wasn't looking at his teeth. She wasn't looking at his tail. She was looking right into his golden, reptilian eyes. "Don't listen to them," she said softly, but loud enough for the closest students to hear. "You saved my life. You're amazing, Midoriya. You're gonna be a great hero." Izuku's breath hitched. A single, hot tear rolled down his scaly cheek. He didn't say anything. He just nodded, offering her a trembling, terrifying, beautiful smile. "Well, well. What a mess we have here." An old woman with a giant syringe walking cane bustled through the crowd. "Recovery girl. Out of the way, you lot. Let me see the injured." She walked up to Uraraka, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead to heal her leg. She then turned her gaze up to Izuku. She looked him up and down, taking in his massive, mutated form. "You've got quite the engine in there, boy," Recovery girl noted, tossing him a handful of gummy bears. "Eat these. Your blood sugar must be completely depleted after moving a mass like yours at that speed." Izuku caught the gummies in his massive hand and swallowed them all in one gulp. "Thank you, ma'am. Go home, all of you." Recovery girls shooed the other students. "The exam is over. You'll get your results in the mail." Izuku turned and began the long walk back to the entrance gates. He was exhausted. His muscles ached, his tail felt like lead, and his jaw was sore from the strain of the death roll. But as he walked, he didn't hunch his shoulders. He didn't bind his tail. He had uncaged the beast. And for the first time, he realized that the beast could protect people. 1 week later, Izuku sat in his bedroom, staring blankly at the wall. The heat lamps above his bed hummed their familiar tune, bathing him in warm, infrared light. He was wearing his loose sweatpants, his tail resting comfortably on the floor. He had spent the last 7 days agonizing over the exam. He knew he had gotten at least 52 points. Historically, that was enough to pass the practical. But the written exam was difficult, and he couldn't shake the memory of the other students' terrified faces. Yui was a school for heroes. If the teachers thought his quirk was too villainous, too uncontrollable, they could reject him based on his psychological profile alone. He had torn a robot apart with his teeth. It wasn't exactly heroic in the traditional sense. "Izuku!" Inko's voice shrieked from the hallway. It wasn't a scream of terror. It was a shriek of pure panic. She burst into his room, sliding on the hardwood floor, clutching a standard-sized envelope in her hands. The envelope bore the red wax seal of Yue High School. "It's here! It came!" She panted, holding it out to him like it was a live bomb. Izuku's heart hammered against his ribs. He took the envelope, his massive claws gently peeling open the seal. He reached inside, expecting a piece of paper, Instead, a small, heavy metal disc slid out, clattering onto his desk. Before Izuku could question it, the disc whirred to life. A holographic projection shot upward, illuminating the dark room. "I am here as a projection," Izuku gasped. The towering hologram of All Might stood before him, wearing a sharp yellow suit. "Young Midoriya!" The hologram boomed. "Apologies for the delay. I've been quite busy finalizing my paperwork, for you see, I am the newest faculty member at UA High." Izuku's jaw dropped. All Might was teaching at UA. "You did remarkably well on the written test," All Might continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. "And your performance in the practical exam was terrifyingly effective. You scored an impressive 52 villain points. You utilized your unique biology flawlessly." Izuku gripped the edges of his desk. "However," All Might said, leaning forward, "this is a hero course. We do not just grade on destruction." The hologram shifted. It played a clip from the exam. It showed Izuku, hunched over and terrified, watching the zero-pointer approach. It showed him preparing to run, and then, it showed him turning around, roaring, and launching himself at the machine to save Uraraka. "A true hero is one who overcomes their own nature to save others." All Might's voice resonated through the room. "You fought your own biological instincts. You risked exposing the terrifying reality of your power, all to save a fellow examinee." And she did not let that go unnoticed. The video shifted again, showing Uraraka standing in front of President Mike after the exam. "Excuse me," she was saying. "The boy with the green scales and the tail. Midoriya. Can I give him some of my points? He saved me. He's so brave. I want him to pass." Tears welled up in Izuku's golden eyes. She had tried to give up her points for him. "We don't just have villain points, young Midoriya," All Might smiled proudly. "A hero course that rejects those who save others is no hero course at all. Rescue points. Given by a panel of judges." The scoreboard appeared on the screen. Izuku Midoriya. Villain points 52. Rescue points 60. Total 112 points. Izuku stared at the number. First place. He had utterly shattered the exam record. "You are not a monster, Izuku Midoriya," All Might said softly, his blue eyes shining with absolute faith. "You are a protector. You are a hero. Come, young man. This is your hero academia." The projection clicked off, leaving the room in silence. Izuku sat there for a long moment. He looked down at his massive, scaled hands. He looked at the heavy tail resting behind him. He thought of his father. He thought of the 10 years of hiding in the dark, pretending to be nothing. He didn't need to hide anymore. Izuku threw his head back and let out a sound he hadn't made since he was a toddler. It wasn't a roar of anger, and it wasn't a hiss of fear. It was a deep, rumbling, booming laugh. Inko ran forward, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck, crying tears of absolute joy. Izuku hugged her back, his massive tail wagging furiously against the floorboards, completely unable to contain his happiness. The beast was uncaged. And he was going to save the world. The morning sun filtered through the Midoriya apartment, casting long, golden geometric shapes across the hardwood floor. Izuku stood in front of his full-length mirror, his amber, slit-pupil eyes meticulously scanning his reflection. Today was different. Today, there were no heavy industrial bindings. There were no oversized, shapeless yellow hoodies. There was no surgical mask to hide his jaws. Today, he wore the prestigious uniform of UA High School. The uniform had required expensive modifications by the school's support department to accommodate his massive, 300-pound, heavily mutated frame. The standard gray blazer had been tailored with extra width in the shoulders to fit his dense musculature, and the back featured a specialized, reinforced slit down the center. This allowed the thick, jagged osteoderms, the bony, armor-like ridges running down his spine, to protrude comfortably without tearing the fabric. But the most significant alteration was the pants. They were custom-fitted, with a large, reinforced opening at the base of the spine. Through this opening, his massive, 6-foot-long tail swayed freely, the heavy, spiked tip resting against the floor with a soft, rhythmic thud. Izuku reached up with his webbed, claw-tipped fingers and awkwardly adjusted the red tie around his neck. It felt incredibly strange not to be suffocating under layers of heat-retaining thermal wear. The spring morning was mild, and while he wasn't perfectly warm, his unhindered movements generated enough ambient friction to keep his cold-blooded biology from slipping into lethargy. Izuku? Are you ready? Inko's soft voice called from the kitchen. Izuku took one last, deep breath, his chest expanding massively beneath the blazer. I am a UA student. I earned this. Coming, Mom, he rumbled, his raspy, baritone voice vibrating in the small hallway. Breakfast was a massive affair, as always. A mountain of protein to fuel his hyperactive metabolism. As he ate, Inko fussed over him, straightening his collar, brushing a piece of lint off his dark green scales. You look wonderful, Izuku, she beamed, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Just try not to let your tail knock over any desks, okay? I know how excited you get. I'll be careful, Mom, Izuku promised, offering a soft, albeit toothy smile. The commute to school was an entirely new experience. For 10 years, Izuku had walked these streets with his head down, a hunched, invisible shadow. Today, he walked tall. At 6'2", with the raw, intimidating bulk of an apex predator, he towered over most commuters on the train. The reactions were immediate. As he stepped onto the crowded train car, the immediate vicinity cleared out. Businessmen clutched their briefcases tighter, schoolgirls whispered behind their hands, an elderly woman stared at the massive, dark green tail swaying behind him. Monster. Villain. Freak. The old anxieties whispered in the back of his mind. His tail twitched, an instinctual urge to curl it around his legs and make himself smaller fighting against Tashinori's training. But then Izuku remembered the feeling of Uraraka's hand on his arm. He remembered All Might's words. You are a protector. Izuku closed his eyes, took a breath, and simply held on to the overhead bar, letting his claws click softly against the metal. He ignored the stairs. He belonged here. When he finally passed through the towering gates of UA High, a wave of relief washed over him. The campus was massive, designed specifically to accommodate heteromorphs of all shapes and sizes. The hallways were wide enough for giants, the ceilings high enough for flyers. For the first time, Izuku felt like the world wasn't closing in on him. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors, his heavy boots and the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of his tail announcing his approach long before he rounded a corner. Finally, he stood before a gargantuan door with the bold red letters 1A painted across it. Izuku swallowed hard. His heart hammered against his ribs. This is it. The hero course. The best of the best. He reached out, his massive, scaled hand grasping the oversized handle, and slid the door open. The classroom was already bustling with activity. But the moment the door slid open, a hush fell over the room. 20 pairs of eyes snapped toward the entrance. Izuku froze in the doorway. He suddenly felt very, very large. Standing near the front of the room was the tall, bespectacled boy from the entrance exam, Tenya Ida. He was currently in the middle of a rigid, chopping hand gesture directed at Katsuki Bakugo, who was slouching at his desk with his feet propped up on the table. Ida's hand stopped mid-chop. He turned, his eyes widening behind his rectangular frames as he took in the sheer mass of the boy in the doorway. The rest of the class stared in stunned silence. Some looked awed. Some looked genuinely intimidated. A small boy with purple, grape-like hair took one look at Izuku's jaws and practically dove under his desk with a muffled squeak. Hello, Izuku rasped, his voice a deep, guttural vibration that seemed to rattle the windows. Bakugo's head snapped up. His crimson eyes locked onto Izuku, and in an instant, violent sneer twisted his features. The explosive blonde didn't say anything, but the air pressure around his desk seemed to drop, the faint scent of burnt sugar and nitroglycerin permeating the air. Before the silence could stretch into something agonizing, a familiar, cheerful voice broke the tension. Midoriya! Achiko Uraraka bounced up from her seat near the back, her face breaking into a massive, welcoming smile. You made it! I knew you would! That punch, that bite, at the entrance exam was so amazing, the tension in Izuku's chest vanished instantly. His heavy tail, which had been frozen stiff, suddenly betrayed his emotions, beginning to thump rapidly against the floorboards in a rhythmic, uncontrollable display of relief. Thud 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 thud. Uraraka, Izuku managed, stepping into the room, his dark green scales flushing slightly. "It's good to see you." Ida quickly recovered from his stupor and marched over, his movements perfectly mechanical. He stopped precisely 2 feet in front of Izuku and bowed at a perfect 90-degree angle. "I am Tenya Ida from Sumai Private Academy," he announced loudly. "I must formally apologize to you, Midoriya. During the entrance exam orientation, I reprimanded you for your tail movements, assuming you were not taking the exam seriously. I failed to recognize that your physical reactions were tied to your incredible biology, and I completely missed the hidden rescue criteria of the practical. You are a far superior student than I." Izuku waved his clawed hands frantically, completely overwhelmed. "And no, Ida. Please don't apologize. I was really nervous, and you were right to point it out, and I didn't know about the rescue points either. My body just kind of moved on its own. A true hero's instinct," Ida praised, adjusting his glasses. "I am honored to study alongside you. Man, you are huge." A boy with spiky red hair and sharp, shark-like teeth bounded over, looking at Izuku with absolute stars in his eyes. "I'm Eijiro Kirishima. That mutation is so manly. Are those scales as hard as they look?" Kirishima reached out, tapping his knuckles against the thick, jagged osteoderms on Izuku's forearm. The sound was like knocking on solid stone. "Whoa! That's incredible defense." Kirishima grinned. "My quirk just makes me get hard, but you're built like a tank all the time." Thank you," Izuku mumbled, completely unaccustomed to positive attention. People were talking to him. They weren't running away. They were treating him like a normal person. "If you're just here to make friends, you can pack up your stuff and leave." The voice was tired, muffled, and came from the floor. The entire class jumped. Izuku looked down. Lying on the floor near the podium, zipped up tightly in a bright yellow sleeping bag, was a haggard-looking man. He looked like a giant caterpillar. The man unzipped the sleeping bag, revealing bloodshot eyes, messy black hair, and a thick scarf wrapped around his neck. He pulled a juice pouch from the bag, taking a slow sip. "It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down," the man drawled, stepping out of the bag. "Time is limited. You kids are not rational enough." Izuku recognized him instantly. The Erasure Hero, Eraserhead. An underground pro-hero. "I'm your homeroom teacher, Shota Aizawa," he stated flatly. The class gasped. "Nice to meet you. Now, put these on and head out to the P grounds." Aizawa reached into his sleeping bag and pulled out a blue and white UE track uniform. The boys' locker room was chaotic as everyone changed out of their formal uniforms. Izuku found an empty corner and began unbuttoning his tailored shirt. As he slipped it off, revealing his bare torso, the locker room went dead silent again. Without his clothes, the true extent of his heteromorphic biology was undeniable. He was a wall of hyperdense muscle, corded and thick. His skin was a mosaic of swamp green scales, overlapping like heavy chain mail. The bony ridges of his spine looked sharp enough to cut glass. But it wasn't just the scales that drew their attention. It was the scars. While his scales were incredibly tough, 10 years of suppressing his quirk, the friction of heavy industrial bindings, and the occasional violent flare-up of his body growing too fast for his restrictive clothes had left their mark. There were patches of pale, discolored scales around his waist, and the base of his tail where the bindings had constantly dug into his flesh. "Dude," a boy with yellow hair and a black lightning bolt streak muttered. "You look like you've been to war." Izuku quickly pulled the UAP shirt over his head, hiding his torso. The school had provided him with a custom pair of track pants that accommodated his tail, and he pulled them up swiftly. It's just from my quirk," Izuku said softly, avoiding their gazes. "My body grew a bit too fast." Bakugo, standing a few lockers down, slammed his locker door shut with a violent clang. He glared at Izuku's scarred waistline. Bakugo knew exactly what those scars were from. He knew Izuku had spent the last decade wrapping his own body in cargo straps just to appease a society that Bakugo believed they should be dominating. It made Bakugo sick. "Stop staring at the freak and hurry up," Bakugo growled, shoving past Kirishima and marching out the door. Izuku sighed, letting his tail droop slightly. Some things never changed. The P grounds were vast and perfectly manicured. The sun was fully up now, and Izuku felt the familiar, comforting warmth seeping into his cold-blooded system, loosening his joints and accelerating his heart rate. Aizawa stood before the 20 students of Class 1A, looking supremely bored. A quirk apprehension test? The class echoed in unison. What about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? Uraraka asked, stepping forward. If you're going to become a hero, you don't have time for such leisurely events, Aizawa said, his tone chillingly practical. UA's selling point is how unrestricted its school traditions are. That's also how the teachers run their classes. You kids have been doing these standard fitness tests since junior high, right? Physical tests where you weren't allowed to use your quirks. The country still uses averages taken from results devoid of quirks. It's not rational. Aizawa's tired eyes shifted, locking directly onto Bakugo. Bakugo, you finished first in the practical exam. In junior high, what was your best result for the softball throw? 67 meters, Bakugo scoffed. Try doing it with your quirk. Aizawa tossed the baseball to the explosive blonde, pointing to a white circle painted on the dirt. You can do whatever you want as long as you stay in the circle. Hurry up. Give it all you've got. Bakugo stepped into the ring, rolling his shoulders. He stretched his arms, a feral grin spreading across his face. He's going to use his blast to propel the ball, Izuku analyzed silently. Maximum thermal expansion. Dai-ai! Bakugo roared. He threw the ball, unleashing a massive, deafening explosion from his palm at the exact moment of release. The concussive shockwave blew the dust off the field, sending the ball rocketing into the sky like a mortar shell. The class watched in awe as the ball vanished into the clouds. Beep. Aizawa held up a digital device. Know your own maximum first. That is the most rational way to form the foundation of a hero. The screen read 705.2 m. 700 meters? Seriously? Kaminari gasped. What is this? It looks so fun. Mina Ishido, a girl with pink skin and horns, cheered. We can use our quirks as much as we want. As expected from the hero course. A boy with tape dispenser elbows laughed. Aizawa's eyes darkened. The air around him suddenly felt incredibly heavy. It looks fun, huh? Aizawa drawled, his voice dropping an octave. You have 3 years to become heroes. Will you have an attitude like that the whole time? All right. Whoever comes in last place in all 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be punished with expulsion. The class erupted in shock. Expulsion? On the first day? Uraraka cried out. That's completely unfair. Natural disasters, massive accidents, and selfish villains. Calamities whose time or place cannot be predicted. Japan is covered with unfairness, Aizawa countered, pushing his hair out of his eyes. Heroes are the ones who reverse those situations. If you wanted to go talk with your friends at Mickey D's after school, too bad. For the next 3 years, UA will do all it can to give you one hardship after another. Go beyond. Plus ultra. Overcome it with all you've got. Izuku felt a massive surge of adrenaline. Expulsion. If he failed here, he would be sent right back to the dark, damp underpass. He would go back to being a monster in hiding. His golden eyes narrowed. His slit pupils contracted. The scales on his arms seemed to lock together, his muscles hardening into iron. I am not going back into the swamp. Test 1, 50-meter dash. Ida went first, practically flying across the track with his engine calves, clocking in at 3.04 seconds. Then, it was Izuku's turn. He was paired against Bakugo. They stepped up to the starting line. Bakugo kept his hands raised, aiming his palms backward, preparing to use his explosions to propel himself forward. He glared at Izuku out of the corner of his eye. Don't think you can beat me just because you took off your heavy clothes, Deku, Bakugo snarled softly. Izuku didn't respond. He didn't even stand up straight. Instead, Izuku dropped entirely down onto all fours. He dug his heavily clawed fingers into the dirt of the track. His massive legs coiled beneath his 300-pound frame like massive, biological springs. He stretched his heavy tail out completely straight behind him, lifting it off the ground to eliminate drag and serve as a perfect aerodynamic rudder. The stance was entirely non-human. It was the stance of an apex predator preparing to ambush a gazelle. Aizawa, watching from the sidelines, raised an eyebrow. He's abandoning bipedal locomotion entirely to maximize the kinetic output of his spinal column and hind legs. Smart. Let's see the acceleration. The starting robot raised its flags. Ready. Go! Boom! Bakugo launched himself forward on a continuous stream of fire, rocketing down the track. But Izuku didn't run. He exploded. With a deafening crack, the dirt beneath Izuku's feet shattered. The sheer kinetic force of his leg muscles propelling his massive bulk forward created a localized shockwave. He didn't take steps, he bounded, his spine flexing and extending like a whip. He stayed incredibly low to the ground, a terrifying blur of green scales and raw muscle. He crossed the 50 meters in what felt like a single, monstrous leap. He passed the sensor, digging his claws into the earth to aggressively brake, his tail whipping around to arrest his momentum. He slid to a halt, a cloud of dust billowing around him. 2.89 seconds, the robot announced. A split second later, Bakugo flew past the finish line. 4.13 seconds, Bakugo landed hard, skidding on his boots. He whirled around, his crimson eyes wide with absolute fury as he looked at Izuku's time. Deku had beaten him. Not by a little. By a massive margin. And he hadn't even used a flashy quirk. He had just moved. Izuku stood up, dusting off his claws. He didn't gloat. He simply walked back toward the group, his tail swaying in a calm, confident rhythm. Holy crap! Kaminari whispered, staring at the grooves Izuku had left in the dirt. He's like a freaking dinosaur. Test 2, grip strength. The class gathered around the digital dynamometers. Izuku held the small device in his massive right hand. His claws clicked against the plastic housing. He looked at the machine. A normal human's grip strength is around 50 kilograms. Ida got around 80. Shoji got 540 using his tentacles. Izuku gripped the handle. His mutation didn't just give him the bite force of a crocodile. It mapped the terrifying, bone-crushing muscle density of a Sobek's jaw across his entire skeletal structure. His forearms were thick with corded muscle designed to hold on to thrashing prey underwater. Izuku squeezed. He didn't even strain. He just tightened his fist. The digital numbers on the screen blurred as they skyrocketed. 100, 300. 600, 900. Crunch. With a sickening sound of snapping plastic and grinding metal, the dynamometer shattered in Izuku's hand. The internal springs snapped, and the digital screen cracked down the middle, freezing on the number 1,240 kilograms before completely dying. Izuku froze, looking down at the broken pieces of plastic in his palm. Ah! Izuku panicked, his tail tucking instinctively between his legs. He looked up at Aizawa with wide, apologetic eyes. I'm so sorry, Sensei. I didn't mean to break it. I'll pay for it, I promise. Aizawa merely sighed, marking something down on his clipboard. Just grab another one and use your non-dominant hand. And don't squeeze as hard this time. I don't have the budget to replace 50 of these. The rest of the class stared in pure, unadulterated shock. Over 1,000 kilos? Mineta shrieked, clutching his head. He could crush my skull like a grape. That's terrifyingly awesome. Kirishima cheered, throwing a punch into the air. Test 3, standing long jump. Most students used their quirks to propel themselves over the sandbox. Bakugo used explosions, Aoyama used his naval laser, and Azuri, the frog girl, cleared it easily with her amphibian leg strength. Izuku stepped up to the edge of the sandbox. He didn't drop to all fours this time. Instead, he turned his back to the sandbox. What is he doing? Uraraka murmured, tilting her head. Izuku planted his heavy boots firmly in the dirt. He bent his knees slightly. Then, he raised his massive, 6-foot tail high into the air. With a sudden, explosive burst of energy, he swung his tail downward, slamming the heavy, spiked tip directly into the ground behind him. The tail acted like a massive, biological pole vault. The sheer force of the impact launched Izuku's 300-pound body backward into the air in a perfect, high-arcing backflip. He sailed entirely over the sandbox, clearing the distance with terrifying ease, and landed on his feet with a heavy, earth-shaking thud. He straightened up, his tail swishing lazily. Aizawa nodded approvingly. He has exceptional spatial awareness of his mutation. He's not just a brute. He understands biomechanical leverage. Test 5, softball throw. By the time the final test arrived, Izuku was dominating the leaderboards. He hadn't scored first in every test. He was too heavy for the side-to-side stepping, and his sheer mass made the seated toe touch a bit awkward due to his tail base. But his raw kinetic output in the strength and speed categories was monstrous. Uraraka stepped up to the circle and tapped the ball, removing its gravity. She threw it, and it sailed into the stratosphere. Infinity, Aizawa announced, showing the screen. The class cheered. Midoriya. You're up, Aizawa called out. Izuku stepped into the white circle. Aizawa tossed him a fresh baseball. Izuku caught it easily in his webbed hand. It looked like a golf ball in his massive claws. Izuku looked out at the vast field. He knew he couldn't get Infinity. He didn't have an elemental quirk, nor could he defy gravity. He just had raw mutant muscle. He took a breath. All right. Let's see what a Sobut can really do. Izuku widened his stance, his heavy boots digging deep into the dirt. He brought his right arm back, his massive pectoral and shoulder muscles bulging against the fabric of his pea shirt. But he didn't just use his arm. He twisted his entire torso, coiling his spine. He swung his massive tail in the opposite direction, creating an immense, terrifying amount of counter-rotational torque. His body became a tightly wound spring of muscle, bone, and scale. With a guttural roar, Izuku unwound. His tail snapped back, throwing his center of mass forward. His spine whipped, transferring the kinetic energy from his legs through his core and into his shoulder. He threw the ball. The sound was like a cannon going off. A visible shockwave rippled out from his hand, kicking up a massive cloud of dust around the pitching circle. The ball deformed under the immense pressure of his throw, flattening into an oval before rocketing into the sky. It tore through the air, leaving a faint white contrail behind it, breaking the sound barrier with a sharp crack. Izuku stumbled forward slightly, his arms smoking faintly from the sheer friction of the movement. He caught his balance, his chest heaving as he looked up. Aizawa looked at his device. He turned the screen toward the class. 812.4 m, over 800 meters. Kaminari breathed. Using just pure, raw strength. That's insane. He beat Bakugo's score, Ashido pointed out. Those words were a fatal mistake. Bakugo, who had been simmering in absolute, unadulterated rage for the past hour, finally snapped. He had watched Deku, the quirkless, pathetic, cowardly swamp rat he had bullied for a decade, completely eclipse him in every physical metric. Deku wasn't hiding anymore. Deku was flaunting his power. DKU, Bakugo screamed, a sound of pure, feral fury. He ignited explosions in both his palms, launching himself directly at Izuku's back. You bastard! Tell me how you did that! What else are you hiding? Izuku heard the crackle of explosions. He didn't even have to turn around. The instinct took over. Without thinking, Izuku dropped his center of gravity. He spun on his heel, his massive tail whipping around defensively. His jaw parted, a terrifying, guttural hiss tearing from his throat. His golden eyes locked onto the airborne Bakugo, his slit pupils dilating into wide, black voids of predatory aggression. His muscles tensed, preparing to intercept Bakugo, drag him to the ground, and crush him. But before Izuku could strike, a white blur shot past his face. Thick carbon fiber cloth wrapped tightly around Bakugo's torso, binding his arms to his sides. Bakugo hit the dirt hard, his explosions instantly fizzling out. He struggled violently, but the cloth held firm. What the? These cloths are hard. Bakugo grunted, thrashing on the ground. They are weapons for capture made of carbon fibers woven with metal wire made of a special alloy, Aizawa said, his voice cold. His hair was floating, his eyes glowing a menacing red as he glared at Bakugo. Stop using your quirk. I'm getting dry eye. Aizawa blinked, his hair falling back to his shoulders. He retracted his capture weapon, freeing Bakugo. We're wasting time, Aizawa said, turning his back on them. Whoever's next, step up. Bakugo stayed on the ground for a moment, his chest heaving. He glared up at Izuku. But Izuku wasn't looking at him with fear. Izuku was breathing heavily, his tail swishing aggressively, his amber eyes still locked onto Bakugo with the cold, unblinking stare of a crocodile watching its prey. For the first time in his life, Bakugo felt a genuine chill run down his spine. Izuku blinked, snapping out of his predatory trance. He instantly looked down, his tail drooping back to the ground. He rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking very much like a nervous teenager again. Aizawa observed the interaction silently. Midoriya has raw power, but his mutant instincts are intensely volatile. When threatened, he immediately shifts into lethal defense. He's a biological weapon struggling to act like a high schooler. The test concluded shortly after. The class gathered around Aizawa as he pulled out his holographic projector. Moving on. I'll quickly announce the total results, Aizawa said. I won't read them all out, just look at the projection. The list appeared in the air. Izuku's eyes immediately shot to the bottom, terrifyingly certain he had failed somehow. But his name wasn't there. He scanned upward. 1. Momo Yaoyorozu. 2. Shoto Todoroki. 3. Izuku Midoriya. 4. Katsuki Bakugo. Izuku gasped. Third place. He had beaten Bakugo overall. He looked over at the blonde. Bakugo was staring at the scoreboard, his face pale, his fists trembling with silent rage. By the way, I was lying about the expulsion, Aizawa said flatly, turning off the projector. The class stared at him in dead silence. It was a rational deception to draw out the upper limits of your quirks. Aizawa offered a terrifying, sinister smile. What? The class shrieked. Of course it was a lie, Yaoyorozu, a tall girl with black hair, sighed, shaking her head. It should have been obvious if you just thought it through. I didn't think it through at all, Izuku thought, his soul leaving his body. I thought I was going to be sent back to the swamp. With that, we're done here. There are handouts with the syllabus and such in the classroom, Aizawa said, walking away. Midoriya. Izuku froze, his tail stiffening. Why yes, sensei? Aizawa paused, looking back over his shoulder. You have immense power. But you need to learn to control your physical space. You're not the only one in the room anymore. Learn to rein in the tail before you accidentally shatter someone's femur. Why yes, sir. I will, Izuku bowed deeply. As the class began the walk back to the locker rooms, the tension of the tests melted away. The students began chattering excitedly, comparing scores and talking about their quirks. Izuku walked slightly behind the main group, giving them space. He was exhausted. The sudden spikes of adrenaline, combined with the sheer kinetic output of his body, had left him feeling sluggish. He needed to sit under his heat lamps. Midoriya. Izuku stopped. Standing a few feet away, waiting for him, was Tsuyu Azuri. The girl with the frog mutation. She had large, dark eyes, wide amphibian features, and a slightly hunched posture that felt incredibly familiar to Izuku. Oh, Azuri, Izuku said softly. You did really well on the lateral jumps. Call me Tsu, she croaked, tilting her head. I wanted to talk to you. Because we're both aquatic mutants, Izuku blinked. We are? You're a Sobek, aren't you? Tsu asked bluntly, walking up beside him and matching his pace. A crocodile lineage. Ectothermic biology. Thick dermal armor. Incredible bite force. Izuku's heart skipped a beat. She knew the name. Why yes. I'm a tree frog mutation, Tsu said, pointing to herself. I'm cold-blooded too. Not as extreme as you, but the mornings are hard. And I noticed your eyes. My eyes? Izuku asked, suddenly self-conscious. He knew his golden, slit pupils were one of his most intimidating features. Yeah. When Bakugo attacked you, your pupils contracted. Your posture dropped. You weren't thinking like a person anymore. You were thinking like a predator, Tsu observed, her voice calm and completely devoid of judgment. It happens to me sometimes, too. When I see a bug fly by, my tongue just shoots out before I can stop it. The lizard brain is loud. Izuku stopped walking. He looked down at Tsu, absolutely stunned. No one had ever articulated it like that before. No one had ever understood the silent, exhausting war he fought every second of every day against his own DNA. It is loud, Izuku whispered, his voice vibrating with raw emotion. It's so loud. Every time someone moves too fast, or yells, or attacks me, it tells me to bite. It tells me to crush them. I hate it. I just want to be normal. I want to be a hero, But my body is a villain's body. Tsu looked up at him. She didn't look scared. She just looked deeply empathetic. I don't think you have a villain's body, Midoriya, Tsu said softly. A villain wouldn't try so hard to protect the people around them from themselves. Your eyes look sad for an apex predator. You care too much to ever let the beast win. Izuku stared at her. A heavy, profound weight seemed to lift off his broad, scaled shoulders. Thank you, Tsu, Izuku rumbled, a genuine, warm smile finally breaking across his terrifying features. Ribbit, Tsu smiled back. Come on. Let's go change before our blood freezes. As they walked back toward the locker rooms together, Izuku let his massive tail sway behind him, no longer trying to hide it, no longer ashamed of the sound it made against the pavement. He was the last Sobuk. He was terrifying. He was cold-blooded, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't alone.